You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 166. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Hello, my dear friend. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm thrilled to have you join me here this week and to introduce you to our guest this week, Joan Parsons Ziady. Joan is here to talk to us about well-being for lawyers, and in particular, bite-size well-being for lawyers. Joan is perfectly positioned to speak with us on this topic. She spent 30 years in private practice, including as an equity partner at a national U.S. law firm, before founding Winslow Workplace Advisors 3 years ago, where she helps lawyers and law firms advance professional development while fostering connection and well-being. Outside of work, Joan is a wife and the mother of 4 grown children, so she knows firsthand what it's like to juggle your family commitments with your professional obligations. In terms of what you can expect to hear about today, Joan is going to share her definition of well-being. She's going to talk about why well-being is different for lawyers and what you can do about it. And she's going to offer some practical bite-sized ideas that you can implement into your day-to-day to incorporate more well-being. So without further ado, I'm going to share our interview with you. I hope that you enjoy the episode and that it gives you ideas about how you can incorporate more well-being into your practice. Joan, it is wonderful to have you here on the podcast. To start things off, we would love to learn a little bit more about you.
Sure, Paula. I am very happy to be here today. Thank you for having me. A little bit about me. I am from the Boston area. I practiced law here for 30 years while raising 4 children with my husband, who is also a lawyer. We love to travel, either just the 2 of us or the whole family, depending on who's available. And about 3 years ago, I shifted gears professionally and became a workplace advisor. And having experienced the pressure points of practicing law firsthand for many years, I now help lawyers work smarter and feel better.
And Joan, I'm so excited to have you speak with us today because I love that you have such a breadth of experience in law. You've been a partner, you've had 30 years of practice, you have 4 children that you've raised at the same time, which is incredible. And for us to talk about well-being and what that looks like, I think what you're going to share today is really going to resonate with a lot of our listeners. So super excited to dive in. One of the things I'd love for you to share with us is what prompted you to make that transformation from law firm partner to doing the work that you do now as a workplace advisor?
Sure. So I'll back up a little bit and kind of start at the beginning. After graduating law school, I joined a national firm and worked my way up to equity partner in the commercial real estate finance practice group. And for many years, I was very busy closing deals and raising my kids, and time went by quickly. And I got to the point where everything about my career looked great on paper, but I wasn't always feeling great. Stress was taking a toll, and I wasn't sure what really, if anything, I could do about that. So for a long time, I accepted that the not feeling great is just, the way it is in the practice of law. This is what we sign up for when we decide to go to law school, and that's that. Then things changed, and I shifted my mindset. And the more senior I became, the more I focused on the mentoring aspects of my role as a law firm partner and leader, and on finding ways in which we can do better in the legal profession when it comes to mentoring, well-being, and cultivating positive, healthy work environments. So I made the decision to leave my practice and make this my primary focus. I then supplemented my legal training and experience, earning certificates in diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as mental health first aid, basically reading everything I can get my hands on about positive psychology. And I launched my consulting business. And one of the first things I did in this new role was to create the roadmap that I wished I had when I was an associate. And it's a roadmap with some simple steps that busy lawyers can follow to incrementally improve their well-being while advancing their careers. And I look forward to talking with you about that today, Paula. And thanks again for having me.
Beautiful. I'm excited to hear about your roadmap as well. I think that's such a nice way to set things up for people, right? What are the steps that I need to do in order to have that sense of well-being? And I think what you highlighted there as well, having that career that looks so great on paper and trying to reconcile that with the stress that you were feeling behind the scenes. I think this is something that so many people can relate to, and really looking forward to hearing how you would approach this, or how your approach is in the work that you do now. One of the things that you talk about is this concept of well-being, and I would love for you to share with us what well-being means to you.
Sure. Health, purpose, and satisfaction are the pillars of well-being. Well-being is really how we experience health, purpose, and satisfaction overall in our lives. And these pillars and how we experience them, all of that comes from the many different and yet interconnected dimensions of our lives, like our relationships and our jobs and our physical health. And I'll use you as an example, Paula, if you don't mind.
Sure, I'm game.
Okay, great. To demonstrate this dynamic. So you are a lawyer, you are a coach, you're a mom, a wife, a runner, and many other things. And all of these different dimensions of your life come together, they connect, and they create your overall experience of health, purpose, and satisfaction in your life, or your well-being, and ultimately your happiness. And I love the way that Harvard professor Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar defines happiness. He's considered one of the world's leading experts on this topic, and he defines happiness pretty much the same way as I've just defined well-being. According to him, happiness is whole person well-being. And this makes a lot of sense to me. If we think about happiness and well-being as our own internal system with all of these different parts, they're different, but they come together to form a whole. And ideally, we want to try to maintain equilibrium in this system. Another important thing to note about well-being is that it's not something that we achieve and cross off our to-do list. It's a work in progress. It's a journey. I don't have it figured out. Nobody has it figured out, because it's constantly changing depending on what we have going on in our lives at any given time.
I love that, and resonates very strongly with me too. The idea of this podcast being called The Joyful Practice is that it is the ongoing pursuit of something, right? That your dynamics keep shifting. What will bring you that sense of satisfaction might change over time. The way you define your purpose can change over time. So I think that's a really great definition. In your view, why is it so important that we focus on well-being?
It is critically important, because if we're not feeling well, it's really hard to do anything well or to enjoy anything that we're doing. So it's huge. In the professional context, our work product suffers if we're not feeling well. We might feel tired or distracted. We might find that we have to read the same paragraph over and over because it's not sinking in. And that's frustrating. It can be particularly stressful for lawyers in private practice who are billing their time. But the importance of well-being goes way beyond the professional context. Our health suffers in multiple ways across the board when one or more of our well-being dimensions are off significantly. Last year, the US Surgeon General declared a national loneliness and social isolation epidemic in our country. He warned that overall mortality impact of loneliness and isolation is equivalent to smoking daily and even greater than the mortality impact of obesity. So there's really a lot at stake when we're talking about well-being.
Yeah, it really is an important thing for us to focus on. And in a few minutes, we'll turn to some of the practical strategies that everybody can consider and decide whether or not they work for them. In terms of well-being and defining what that is, so you've talked about the health, you've talked about purpose, you've talked about satisfaction. We spoke earlier and you mentioned this concept of a well-being wheel. You've also mentioned this roadmap. So I'm very curious to know how you define these things. What is a well-being wheel and how can lawyers use that to help themselves in terms of well-being?
The well-being wheel is a framework that helps us visualize and assess our well-being, including how our well-being continues to change. And there are many different versions of the well-being wheel out there. Mine is adapted from the Well-Being Toolkit for Lawyers, which was created by Anne Bradford for the American Bar Association. So picture a wheel with 6 spokes coming out from the center. And each spoke of the wheel represents a different dimension of our lives. In no particular order, the dimensions are occupational, social, cognitive, spiritual, physical health, and mental health. So these are our 6 spokes, and it's important that they're all up and running and functioning well in order for the wheel to turn properly, for us to feel centered. So if one dimension or spoke is off, if it has a splinter or it's somehow just not working, then we feel off balance. There's friction and the wheel isn't going to, turn smoothly. So this wheel concept or framework helps us visualize how all this works and how it's connected, which is the key. I mean, we all know that a great day at work can leave us with positive energy at the end of the day, and we're ready to engage with our family or maybe go out with friends, right? That goes to the social dimension. And the opposite is true. After a rough day, we're depleted. That's physical health. And if we show up to the next day at work feeling depleted, we probably don't have our usual focus, and that goes to cognitive health. So it's all related. And our goal is to really try to stay centered and have all of the spokes, all of the dimensions functioning well.
Yeah, I love the idea of the wheel. I've seen similar wheels, and one of the exercises that I was led through once was this idea of rating yourself on a scale of, I think it was 1 to 10 for each of the categories of the wheel. And then we shaded, right? I guess would be a quadrant, whatever 1/6 of the wheel would be like a pie, right? So you'd shade the pie as far out to the corner as you got. So if it was 2 out of 10, you'd barely get past the center. If you were at 10 out of 10, you get all the way to the end of the wheel. So you can imagine if you've got disparity in the way you rank yourselves in each of those wheels, you're going to end up with a really bumpy wheel. So kind of illustrating your point, right, is if you want to stay balanced, you want to look at all these different categories and assess yourself. Where are you on a scale of 1 to 10? And if you're doing really well in one category, that's great. If there's other categories where you see you're really low, those might be areas where you can build up. And so I think it's a really helpful tool to conceptualize where we might want to focus a little bit more of our efforts.
I agree. It's a very useful tool, and I use it when I speak to associates, when I go into law firms and give workshops on this topic. And it really is a concrete way of seeing where we want to add some additional focus, like you said.
Beautiful. And would this be a good time to ask you about the roadmap, or would you like to chat about that a bit later?
I think, why don't we talk about how well-being is different for lawyers, because I think that's going to lead into why it's important that we have some quick hit ways that we can address well-being, which is kind of what the roadmap is all about.
Perfect. Thank you. So tell us more.
Sure. So I have really come to understand in my experience working that prioritizing well-being is very different for lawyers. And that's because of the nature of our job and the fact that it often becomes our identity. People come to lawyers for help, and they come to us with high stakes problems, and it's our job to provide solutions, often very quickly. And we feel pressure, the never let them see you sweat kind of pressure, to appear calm and confident, even if that's not our reality, because that's what people both inside and outside of our organizations want and expect. Our job is to fix problems, and we're not supposed to have problems. And we think about our reputation as lawyers. We don't want to have a reputation for being weak or soft. So if we're struggling either personally or professionally, there's a good chance that we're not going to share that, which leads to feelings of isolation and loneliness and even burnout and so on. And I have some compelling statistics that I'd like to share on this. Last year, when the Surgeon General, the US Surgeon General, declared the national loneliness and social isolation epidemic that I mentioned, he noted that about half of US adults, and I think this is universal, even though I'm talking about the US here, experience loneliness at levels that can negatively impact their physical, mental, and societal health. These numbers are even higher among young people, and they're also higher for lawyers than for the general population. The NORC at the University of Chicago surveyed lawyers in Massachusetts, which is where I practiced for all those years, and their 2023 findings stated that 77% of Massachusetts lawyers reported burnout from their work. Almost 50% considered leaving or left their legal employer or left the legal profession entirely due to burnout or stress in the last 3 years. And those are big numbers, really big numbers. And when we combine this dynamic with the kind of more, faster, better pressure that we often feel at work, lawyers can often get really stuck when it comes to well-being. We feel like we can't talk about it. We don't have time to do anything about it. And we struggle. And it gets to the point where prioritizing well-being feels like just one more thing we don't have time for. And that's not a good feeling.
Yeah. And as you're talking, Joan, it reminds me of a study that's been undertaken in Canada as well, right? I think it came out in 2023. It was a national study for the mental health and wellness of lawyers in Canada. And the results were similar, right? Relatively high levels of anxiety, depression, particularly among younger lawyers, women lawyers. We'll provide a link to that study in the show notes for anybody who's interested in the data. But certainly for lawyers, relative to the rest of the population, there are a number of challenges when it comes to isolation, mental health. And as you pointed out at the beginning, there's this expectation as a lawyer that you are strong and you have the answers and you're confident. And so when you feel and you see people in practice who present that way. And so if on your inside you're feeling nervous or like you don't have all the answers, or if something is happening for you in terms of your mental health and you're comparing what's going on for you internally relative to what other people are presenting externally, it can almost feel like there's an even greater gap between you and them. So I think focusing in on lawyers and what's different for them, it really resonates, I think, with a lot of lawyers. And so what would you recommend then? I mean, given that lawyers are operating in this sort of unique environment, how do they go about prioritizing well-being?
Yes, let's talk about solutions. I think it's time to do that, right? Well, first off, I think we need to shift our mindset away from the all or nothing view of well-being that many of us have. Many lawyers, as you've often said on your podcast, many lawyers have perfectionist tendencies. I agree with that 100%. And we feel like if we don't have an hour plus to either go to lunch with a friend or get to the gym, then we're doomed. Forget it. We just can't. We're not going to be able to work on our well-being. We tend to get stuck in our I don't have time for that default setting. But we're going to change that today. In private practice, I kept track of my time in 6-minute intervals for many years. And being that disciplined about what I could get done in a small block of time has informed the way that I think about well-being. And I designed this roadmap, this bite-sized well-being roadmap, as a very simple strategy to get unstuck, to refresh, or to level up, depending on where you feel you are on your well-being journey, to refresh or level up our approach to well-being in a way that feels doable, that is grounded in the realities of practicing law, and it works even for busy lawyers. So here's how it works. We take small daily actions that add to our day, either personally or professionally. These are bite-sized well-being actions. They're small, quick hits. They're roughly 3 to 6 minutes. They're not more than 0.1 for our private practice lawyers. And they're something that provides an energy reset. It gives us a mood boost. And we can get into lots of examples of these in a minute. So the roadmap provides that we identify some of these bite-sized well-being type quick hit actions that appeal to us. It's very personal. I might think, walking my dog around the block is going to work for me. And you might say, I'm allergic to dogs and, I don't have one, or whatever the case may be. It's very personal. So we identify these small actions we can take, and then we take them 3 times a day. We try not to miss 3 days in a row. I love the number 3 because it's not too big. It's not too small. It feels very doable. I can usually remember 3 things. And in this way, we incrementally and systematically improve our well-being. So this is just very briefly our roadmap for the well-being journey. And just like we wouldn't start out on a long road trip without gas or snacks, that would be crazy. Bite-sized well-being, quick hit activities are like our well-being snacks that will fortify us along the way. And one of the most important things about this roadmap is that it builds a bridge between common sense. I mean, we all know that these things like, having a tall glass of water and taking some deep breaths, whatever the daily practice might be, we all know that those are good for us to do. But it builds a bridge between that common sense and also then common practice. That is, are we actually doing these things regularly? Or we're like, I'll do that later. I don't have time for that now. So bite-sized well-being in the roadmap here helps us break from the all or nothing mindset and helps us realize that we don't have to wait for a vacation or even the end of the workday in order to work on improving our well-being. For lawyers, often small pockets of time are all we have. We have a jam-packed, constantly interrupted day. We can leverage these small pockets of time. And this is a start here, start now strategy or roadmap of these small daily actions that will build on each other and add up to a big positive impact on our well-being.
I love it. And I completely love this idea of you won't be surprised. You mentioned, I talk about it in the podcast, this idea of the all or nothing thinking, right? If we're limiting ourselves to well-being being something that is perfect, we've got a full hour to dedicate to it, we can have the right equipment, etc. If we make that barrier to entry too high, we're just not going to do it, versus turning well-being into something that is bite-sized and doable, right? You talk about 6-minute increments. If that's what appeals, then that's how we can do it. And as you were talking, you use the walk around the block as an example, and you're right. I don't have a dog and I'm allergic. I don't know how you do that.
Oh, no. Okay.
But I love going for walks around the block. And I find even sometimes when I'm at my most stressed is when I actually need that walk around the block the most, right? When your inbox is just exploded and that feeling of overwhelm sets in. Sometimes the best thing I know for myself is to just take a 15-minute window or whatever it happens to be and leave, like go for a walk around the block, let everything settle in my mind, and then go back to it. So I would love to hear from you. I mean, I think walking is a great way to get some bite-sized well-being into your day. I've talked about this on the podcast before, but I have a lot of routines happening. So I like to do, before anybody in my house wakes up, I like to be outside getting some fresh air and some exercise. Evening routines as well throughout the day. If I can get outside, that's probably my main go-to. That's what I find the most rejuvenating. For you, I'd love to hear some of your strategies. And in particular, I mean, with 4 children in a busy legal practice, I would love to know what kind of well-being strategies you implemented for yourself in order to achieve balance, right? Whatever balance looked like on any given day and for you over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I have lots and lots of examples that I can give. I try to think of new ones all the time, and then I have some go-tos that I do almost on a daily basis. And before I jump into those, I want to share the 3 guidelines that I have in terms of trying to find your own bite-sized well-being that's going to work for you. And so the first one is it has to be fast. We've talked about that. We're talking like 3 to 6 minutes here. It has to be focused, no multitasking while we're doing this. And third, it has to create a positive impact in our day. And that could be something that's fun, like listening to, a fun music that makes a fun song that makes you want to dance, or it could be something that's fulfilling in a certain way, either professionally or otherwise. So fast, focus, and creates a positive impact. So some examples, and these are definitely things that I do frequently. Number one probably is connecting with someone. This is a big one. We can check in with our mentor or a friend. I call my mom almost daily and check in and make sure she's doing okay. And sometimes this one for me falls into the fun category because we share a laugh, but often it's more serious because she's struggling with some health issues. It's still a very positive part of my day because I love and appreciate the connection that we have. And I feel really good about the fact that we speak and she knows she's not alone, but it's fulfilling in a different kind of way than something that's kind of jazzes you up. So another example is watering plants or doing anything in nature, really. You mentioned getting outside. I love to see how my hydrangeas are doing. Hydrangeas this year in New England are just beautiful. They're thriving. They're so robust. And I love to go outside and see how they're doing and see if they need a little drink. And speaking of which, your bite-sized well-being action could be as simple as drinking a glass of water while taking some deep breaths. So a lot of these things might be things that we're doing already, which is great. But if we think about doing them consistently and multiple times a day, that's where we can really see some impact. I mean, learning something is another good example. That could mean watching a YouTube video on how to fix something or reading an article. I get a number of email newsletters, and some of them actually say at the beginning, which I love, reading time, 6 minutes. And I think that's great. I can do that. Another thing that I do frequently now is I listen to parts of a podcast, not the whole thing, because I need a longer block for that, but a podcast called Coffee Break French. And you can find this in their other podcasts for different languages on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, easy to find. I listen to this, or at least a snippet of it, while I'm making dinner. And it makes me look forward to our trip to Paris next spring when my daughter will be studying abroad there. And it makes me feel good that I'm learning something. And it lifts what might otherwise be a low in my day because I don't love that whole end of the day making dinner part of the routine. And I sometimes get that energy at that time of day. So this is something that I do to get that lift for what otherwise might be a lower point of the day. And I'll mention one more thing, which I think is my favorite. Something that I do daily is stretch before walking my dog. And I'm someone who needs to stretch regularly. If I don't stretch, my hips get cranky. That's just where we are. And my stretching habit was really hit or miss until I decided to commit to doing it before my morning dog walk for the length of one song. I chose a song that gets me fired up. It's 3 minutes and 10 seconds long. I chose You Make My Dreams Come True by Hall & Oates. That was actually my most played song in 2023 because it's my stretch before I walk the dog song. So I'll put you at the scene. I ask Alexa to play this song. I turn it up. I get down on the floor, and my dog is now super excited. He knows it's 3 minutes until go time. I stretch for 3 minutes and 10 seconds. There are positive vibes all around, and I feel like I've already done something very productive in my day. So this is something that is an example of bite-sized well-being, and it's an action that has become a healthy habit for me.
I love it. And Joan, so much of what you said resonates with me. Love, love, love. I love the idea of connection, right? You mentioned checking in with your mom and having almost daily calls with her. I find that's really important and something you alluded to earlier, right? This idea of trying to step away from loneliness and the effect of that. And what I have found is that there are certain people who have windows that are compatible with my windows, my walking windows. So for me, it usually coincides with, school pickups or something like that. So finding people who you can connect with on a regular basis is huge. You talked about plants. I don't have a green thumb, but people in my neighborhood do. So I don't necessarily go check my hydrangeas, but I'll be checking out the neighborhood plants and just kind of getting to know the area. Like and this will be different for everybody, right? Everybody listening can probably think about, places in their area, whether it's near their home where they work sometimes or near the office. What are some things that you like to visit, right? Just like to go see on one of these short trips that you might take around the block. This idea of learning, I'll check out that podcast. I'm also planning a trip to Paris with my daughter. I'm not sure when exactly, but brushing up on French and getting excited about that. Pairing that with an activity you don't love, right? The whole dinner prep. You're speaking my language. I've always got a podcast in to make that more enjoyable, as well as the cleanup. And I'll throw folding laundry in there. So I think these are all ways of integrating, right? Something that makes you feel good. You mentioned I'm going to forget one of these, but focused, fulfilling. What are the three categories? Focused,
fast, focus, and create a positive impact.
Positive impact. Beautiful. And so just having that strategy behind and the discipline. And I think, as you're talking, I'm thinking about how these are strategies that as a coach, I'll often offer, or similar strategies for lawyers to get things done, right? I'm thinking about time management, procrastination, doing the things on your to-do list that you don't necessarily want to do. And it's giving well-being that priority in your life, right? Where you're, at least for now, until it becomes more of a habit, having to be really focused and disciplined about incorporating something that is enjoyable, because we're probably really good at doing all the things that have to get done, right? The to-do lists and the things, the client deliverables. But this is something that is for us, right? This is something for an individual's well-being. And if this is not something that we're already doing, then we have to take those disciplined steps to bring that in as a habit. I love it. I mentioned earlier, and you mentioned as well, you have 4 children. And again, hats off. I've got 2 and I'm very busy. So I would love to know, and I'm sure others who are listening would love to know, what tips you might have for lawyers who are trying to find some sort of a balance, right? And I say that with air quotes because I think that balance is a very elusive term. It's going to mean different things to different people at different stages of their life. What ideas or suggestions you would have for them when they're already so stretched for time, both at work and at home, to carve out that me time, that well-being time?
Absolutely. I have 2 or maybe 3, if we have time, suggestions. First and foremost is to find someone you feel comfortable talking to openly about the struggle with the juggle. So this isn't part of bite-sized well-being. This takes longer. We need to find some time to connect with somebody. In my view, people who are or were similarly situated can be extremely helpful here because they get it. They can relate to what you're going through in terms of, one of my big issues was when I was at work, I was worrying about what was going on at home and what I was missing. And then vice versa. I'd get home and it would be my time to spend with the kids and my husband, and I'd be checking my phone and worrying about what I was missing and what was popping up. And so it really does help to have somebody who gets it to talk to about it. I found these people through a professional women's networking group, and it made a huge difference for me. I think that it can be helpful to have it be somebody outside your organization. Certainly, if there's someone inside your organization you feel comfortable talking to, that's great too. But the overall and overarching important point here is that we all struggle at times, and talking about it helps us realize that we're not alone. So that's really number 1, even though I cheated a little bit because that's not bite size. So second is I would really encourage people to try using bite-sized well-being to create more positive moments in your day. And the key is the energy shift. I would feel it would bring out negative feelings for me when I would get home from work. And I'm talking about, when we used to actually travel home from work, but whatever you're doing, logging off and walking into the other room, whatever it is. But when you finish work and you're ready to engage with your family, and I felt like they were getting the leftovers of me. They were not getting me at my best because I was already, tired. I might be frustrated. I might be stressed out. And taking 3 to 6 minutes to reset in some way, maybe during your shutdown routine when you're logging off, maybe that's when you play some classical music or a pump up song, whatever it is that you think, is going to help you out there. But you take a small, chunk of time to set yourself up for success, for re-entering with your family. Set yourself up for success with a bite-sized well-being snack. So I really encourage people to do that. And then this is related, but a third thing is when we're thinking about bite-sized well-being and how this can help us, and these suggestions that I have as somebody who was a working mom lawyer for many years, if we can remember, do you have AAA roadside assistance in Canada, Paula? Do you know what AAA is?
Gosh, we probably do. I'm not very good at the car stuff. I leave that to my husband, but go.
Okay. Well, in the US, AAA roadside assistance is pretty well known. And, if you break down or you get a flat tire, they'll come in and tow you or help you out with whatever you need. So I have a AAA part of this roadmap that's bite-sized well-being. And the first A is action, right? We have to know what our bite-sized well-being action is. And we gave some examples of those. And then the second A is anchor. And when I was just talking about logging off, or when I talked about, I do my stretching before my dog walk, that is the anchor. If we're talking about the stretching example, the anchor is the dog walk. I mean, that has to happen every day, no matter what. It could be raining. I could have had a bad sleep the night before. It doesn't matter. The dog walk's going to happen. So if I anchor my stretching to the dog walk, then it is going to happen. So anchors can be very important. And then the last A, okay, we have action, we have anchor. The third one is, again, we need to keep doing this. We need to do it, I would say, at least 3 times a day. And the more we do that and the more we build consistency, we get the incremental and systematic improvement. So those are my suggestions.
I love it. And I am a huge fan of anchors. I think they're one of the most effective time management strategies we can use as well, right? Looking at every day that is laid out before us and the things that we're going to do daily, right? Breakfast, lunch, dinner, arrive at work, whether that's at home or at an office, leave the office, like building around anchors. And so I love the idea of attaching a well-being practice to something that is going to happen every single day, because now it's effectively built in, right? Once you've created the habit of attaching the well-being to the anchor. Something else you said too about creating that energy shift between work and family, and vice versa too, if you want, right? I think sometimes it can be really helpful to also have a very specific intention in mind, right? When you make that shift, right? If it's going from work home with your kids, sometimes it can be as simple as asking yourself, what's most important in this evening that I'm spending with my kids? And, the first word that comes to my mind right now is connection, right? So maybe it's really focusing in on connection that evening. And just by directing your attention to something tangible that you can actually focus on, can help to drown out the noise, right? All the crazy that you're going to step into. Maybe your kids are super young and they've, terrorized your living space, and, you walk into this giant mess. If you've got in your mind's eye that connection is the point, you might be able to approach that situation with a little bit more compassion or willingness to connect with your kid versus just seeing the fact that you've now got an extra hour of tidying, whatever it happens to be. So I love, love, love that idea of focusing on the energy that you're bringing into the room. And then the other question that I had for you, Joan, and this is a little bit off topic and possibly not bite-sized, but I had a conversation yesterday with a fellow mom. We were doing drop-off of our children at day camps. And one thing we were talking about was this idea of outsourcing, right? And I think that is something that can be extremely helpful for parents who are trying to juggle work and family. And it's something that we had in place pretty well before the pandemic struck. And then we kind of lost our systems. And I haven't been great about reintegrating systems. But from your perspective, what are your thoughts on bringing in outside help, right? I mean, you had a career, you have 4 kids. Any thoughts on how you can bring in support? And I've fantasized about having a chef that would do all of our meals, or not even a chef, just a human that can cook, or somebody to come in to help with odd jobs at the house, cleaning, etc. Do you have any views on how we can use outsourcing to make our lives better?
I think outsourcing can be very useful and beneficial. And I also think it's a very personal choice as to what we feel comfortable with. And it also gets into finances too. So I think having that discussion, if you have a partner, a spouse, and figuring out the ways that would be most helpful. How can we be most efficient and maybe most cost effective, definitely most cost effective with this? And then I do think it can be a big help. And I've definitely taken advantage of that. I've been fortunate to have someone that helped me clean the house and dog walkers. I mean, they're definitely not in the morning though, because that's my time and that's when I do my stretching. But there are definitely things that I've done throughout my career that have helped me balance my time commitments and my priorities. And I do think, in today's world, there are lots of things you can do with respect to the groceries. There's all kinds of services where, you can get it. All you have to do is put the ingredients together, or you can certainly get your groceries delivered. So things like that, I think, are really worth considering to then give ourselves more time to do the things that we enjoy more and that are, perhaps a higher priority for us. And I listened to a podcast recently, which introduced a concept to me that may be helpful as people think this through. And that was giving yourself a friction audit. Like, think about your day and think about the parts of your day that cause the most friction for you. Like, you and I agree that dinner time is up there with, if we want to call it a point of friction or a low point or whatever it is, because, it can feel kind of frustrating. It's repetitive. Maybe we run out of ideas, whatever it is. And if we can lift up that low, if we can help smooth out that friction, if we can use outsourcing something to do that, I'm all for it.
I love that. I think the friction audit is such a great way to describe it. And I would love for everybody listening to take this as permission, because I think that's sometimes what's missing, right? I think permission to sit down and think about what would be the most useful ways to outsource what tasks, whether it's meal prep or laundry or cleaning or picking the kids up from whatever activity. I think we need to be looking to that, if we're not already, to make time for ourselves to do other things, right? Whether it's well-being, whether it's working, whether it's spending time with friends. So thank you for talking about outsourcing. I think it's something that I know for myself, it's on my postponed to-do list, but for sure it can make such a big difference. And I love your views on that.
And Paula, if I could just interrupt for 1 second quickly, I do want to give credit where credit is due. And if anybody wants to listen to the podcast where the friction audit is talked about, it's the Mel Robbins podcast, and it's Dr. Adam Alter, who is a professor and a psychologist. And he is the one who introduced this concept, which I thought was terrific.
Brilliant. And I like Mel Robbins too. She's got some great ideas. I think it's the 5-second rule.
Yes,
Do it in 5 seconds if you have the idea.
She's definitely
count
speaking my language.
Yeah, count backwards to set the pressure, whatever it is. I love that. And Joan, you've shared already a number of ways that we can integrate well-being in these bite-sized increments. Any other ways that you would suggest, your top ways of integrating well-being into your personal practice?
The top ways for me really just revolve around choosing your anchors. So, because they can really be anything, and they change, and they should change, because we don't want to get bored and stuck, because that's where we started in the first place, was this concept of feeling stuck. So I think it's trial and error and also experimentation to see what appeals to you. So I would start with picking maybe your anchors. Like for me, when I have coffee in the morning, nobody has to remind me to do that. I know. So if I I attach something to that anchor, it's going to get done. One of the things that I do as my startup routine in the morning when I'm logging on is to play a song that makes me feel peaceful while I do that. And I tidy up my desk, which I don't really like to do, but if I do it for 3 or 4 minutes, again, the length of a song for me is magic. It's magic. One song. I can do anything for the length of a song. So I tidy up my desk and I put things in their place. And if I'm not done in 3 or 4 minutes, then I'll probably stop if I can't, finish up real quick. And that's okay because that's good and I'm good to go. So I think, for me, music is key. And anchors are key. So I would invite people to figure out what works for them, but to try to incorporate the concepts of, once you have your action, incorporate with your anchors, and then again, again, again.
I love that. And I love the idea of having almost like a playlist, right? A ready to go playlist of songs that you can use for well-being. I love the idea of playing music and tidying my desk because like you, I don't love doing it, but when you do it a little bit at a time, right? Just like well-being adds up, those little pockets of time spent tidying your desk, it adds up so quickly. And so those are such great, great, great suggestions. Thank you. Joan, I would love to know, in terms of lawyers who would like to work with you, law firms that would like to work with you, can you tell us a little bit more about how you work with lawyers and how they can reach you?
Absolutely. So I work with law firms on their professional development and well-being initiatives, and I really help with enhancing mentor programs. That's one of the big pillars of my practice now. And we all know that mentorship and connection and well-being all go hand in hand. So I provide seminars and interactive workshops on these topics, and I love doing that. I also work one-on-one with individual lawyers on their business development, their professional development, well-being and work-life integration issues, whatever is top of mind for people. So I serve as a mentor and an external senior advisor in that capacity. And as far as where you can find me, certainly the best places are on LinkedIn and also my website, which is winslowworkplace.com.
Beautiful. And we will link to those at your website. We'll link to your LinkedIn profile as well with the notes that come along with today's episode. So everybody will be able to find you there. Joan, thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure having you on the podcast. And thank you for everything that you've shared. I feel completely inspired to incorporate both bite-sized wellness and bite-sized organization. I won't lie. My brain is kind of thinking about all those little bite-sized things that can be incorporated. Love, love, love the idea of using anchors for that well-being piece of it. Thinking about outsourcing, thinking about being really intentional with our well-being practice. Is there anything before we wrap up that you'd like to add that we didn't cover today?
I will add two quick things. One is
please.
I have really enjoyed our conversation so much, Paula, and I thank you for inviting me onto the podcast. I think what we talked about today in terms of bite-sized well-being and well-being sort of on a micro level really complements well the podcast you did a month or so ago, which was more macro, because that's really important too, to think about things more big picture and well-being and, our health, our mental and physical health. And it's important because we all know that, playing a song and tidying up our desk isn't the be all and end all of well-being. So it's important to think about both macro and micro in terms of well-being. So today we really focused on micro, and if people have missed your podcast on the more macro end of things, I would highly encourage people to go ahead and listen to that episode as well. And then lastly, I just want to point out that we've talked about lawyers, and lawyers have special challenges, you and I both know from experience. But these topics and these techniques and this roadmap are really universal on a very basic level. The stresses that we're talking about feeling, it's part of being human. So, being a lawyer, yes, but just being a person. And so to the extent that any of us tries any of these and it works great, please share it with your friends and your family, whether or not they're lawyers, because this stuff really is universal.
I love that. Thank you so much, Joan. And love that macro, micro distinction as well. And we will link to the other episode. I think I recorded it a few weeks ago about, I think it was sustainable balance, something like that. So we'll link to that in the notes. And just picking up on how you described it, yes, it's having that bigger picture view of overall wellness and balance, whatever that looks like. And then today thinking about, how we can incorporate the action steps that create, right? Because it's the steps that will make up that overall picture. So I really love that. And to your second point, right? This idea that this is not just for lawyers, right? This is universal. And it reminds me of, we had a brief chat before recording today where we talked about leadership, right? And incorporating wellness and well-being as part of a culture of an organization. And I think the more that we are able to adopt these practices, the more we can, by example, show others how they too can incorporate wellness into their practice. And I would include not just our colleagues within law firms and organizations where lawyers are working, but also at home, right? When your children see you taking time for yourself and looking after yourself, that sends a really strong signal to them that it's okay, right? That this is important. This is something that you value for them as well as for yourself. And so I think just the more that we can take care of ourselves, the more we implicitly give permission and encouragement to others to do the same for themselves. So love that you've shared these ideas, shared these ways that we can do that. And just been such a treat having you on today. So thank you again, Joan, for joining us. Thank you for everybody who has joined us to listen in. Please do share any takeaways that you have with us. Love to hear them. And we'll look forward to connecting again soon. Bye for now, everybody.
Thanks, Paula.
Thank you, Joan. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.